From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. K-State's Dan O'Brien on the grain markets. He will size up the USDA's latest World Grain Supply and Demand Report. That included its first projection on 2022 U.S. crop production. He'll offer his take on the longer-range market implications of those USDA numbers. Then the final segment of this week's series on the growth in non-traditional agricultural financing, based on a new report put together by a team of land-grant university agricultural economists. This time, K-State's Jenny Ifft is joined by Bruce Ahrendsen of the University of Arkansas and Will Secor of the University of Georgia. And awaiting with his latest look at the Kansas agricultural weather forecast, K-State's Chip Redmond. All that here on Agriculture Today. Thanks for listening in once again for Agriculture Today. Well, the grain markets have been fed new information from the USDA as of yesterday morning in the monthly World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates report. This one included information on U.S. crop production expectations for the first time in this new crop year. And joining us to cover it all, Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, from his office in Colby, Northwest Kansas. Dan, let's begin with the wheat numbers that came out yesterday. And it's obvious now to the USDA and to everybody that wheat production, winter wheat production specifically, is going to be considerably lower this year.
Well, yes, the hard red winter wheat estimate came in at about 590 million bushels. Now, in some past years, we've been to 650, 700 million, 800 million bushels. But this year we've come in at 590, following on the reports that came out about a week ago of about half of a year ago in Oklahoma, and then tough damage down in Texas. Here we have the wheat tour coming in shortly. They'll see some green but uneven fields. I'd predict that's what I see in the northern part of western Kansas. But you look at the drought monitor ratings and just reports from even Kansas Wheat talking about using a devastation as a terminology. So what they see on that southern swing would be pretty telling. Mm-hmm. So this number came out at 590. Pre-report expectations for that were closer to 650. So that was a surprise to everyone. The overall winter wheat numbers, that includes white wheat, soft red winter, came in at 1.17 billion bushels. Pre-report expectations were at 1.245. So the true tale of the tape will be told when we pull the combines into the field. And really, it's a little off the path of what we normally talk about. But given the high prices, we probably have more incentive than we normally do to go after even tough yields. 10 bushel out in the field at $10 a bushel. Well, hey, that's a pretty good deal. And some of the cash prices, if you look at cash prices across Kansas on yesterday's closes, $12 plus everywhere except in southeast Kansas, where it's $11.80. So we have a lot of incentive to get whatever we can out of the fields on the cash side. And I guess we'll see where all this goes. But one thing that I noticed in that report, the USDA came out and took the gloves off in terms of their projection for the next marketing year's prices. This year, closed at $7.70. And a lot of that had some lower price wheat, a relatively lower price in the early part of the current marketing year that we're in. Well, for this next one coming up, starting June 1, they put in a price at $10.75. And when you look at futures running out for the next 12 months, every one of those on today's closes, which, by the way, we're up 68 cents, every one of those starts at $12. Mm-hmm. So we're not quite sure where we're at. I would add one more thing internationally. Also, the USDA came out and gave their world supply demand estimates of production and ending stocks. In that, really a key issue now in these markets, they still are counting on Ukraine to come in with somewhat of a sizable representative crop. And that, given all that we read and understand, and that Antonio Borraca in our shop now at K-State Ag Economics has been talking about, the logistics in that country are at this time are really war-torn. And that's a polite word to describe it. So The USDA numbers on the world side still include a good chunk of the Ukraine crop coming out, and that, as we say in economics, that's a very heroic assumption.
And the fact of the matter is, stocks are going to be tight. That was reaffirmed in the report various ways, actually, Dan. So that's going to carry the day in the wheat trade for quite some time.
Right. The USDA came in, and it was kind of a surprise to me. Again, as you and I have talked about this from week to week, we've been following the wheat export numbers out of the United States. And the USDA is still anticipating something happening, even with only about 3 weeks left in the marketing year, 2 or 3 weeks left. They raised the export number up for this marketing year. And here we've been trailing behind on that. A lot of times you have this ending flourish of everything getting thrown in, including the products, as I understand it, the processed products. So they're anticipating, even with the struggling pace of U.S. wheat exports, to still come into the end of this marketing year and to see a stronger number even than what we've been seeing. So they're anticipating something happening. It is interesting, though, for the next marketing year, though, that they dropped it down to 775 million instead of the 805 that they have now. So we're a U.S. market being held up by a world market. And if we drop our prices very much, then these transportation differentials, currency issues that are all holding our wheat exports back will be overcome, and we start to move a whole lot of wheat. But right now, we're kind of functioning as a reserve, really, for the rest of the world market.
What the USDA WASDE report had to say about corn production and corn stocks in the U.S. and internationally. The corn yield for this new crop here in the U.S. was about a couple of bushels short of the average estimate. So there was some strength resulting in the trade immediately after on that.
Yeah, the first numbers out of the gate earlier on were that the USDA had from months ago was 181 bushels per acre. That was been the highest we'd seen by 1 or 2 bushels. So now they've come in this first out of the gate WASDE report estimate and put it in at 177. And so they took that as estimated harvested acres versus planted, and then took the lower planted acres that were projected earlier, came up with an estimate of 14.46 billion bushels. Well, that is fully 500 million bushels less than we've been seeing in recent years when we've been over 15. And to make the balance sheet work out, they cut back feed residual use by 275 million down to 5.35 billion, 275 from the current year, reduced exports from 2.5 down to 2.4, didn't touch ethanol. So it seems to me that they've made efforts to not show fully that 500 million bushels coming off the top of that, and to get ending stocks below 1 billion bushels. Because the amount that they've cut back, total usage is about 370 million. So I'm not trying to besmirch what the USDA had done, but on their first estimate, they cut back usage enough to kind of soften the blow of the lower production. And by the way, we're in the midst of planting right now, going great guns wherever we can in the U.S. Corn Belt. And the current soybean to corn futures ratio is below 2. It's at 1.97. And when you look around Kansas at forward contract bids, particularly out in the West, you've got a ratio of about 1.75 out in Garden City. These are the top bids, and about 1.84 in Colby. So in western Kansas, where we're growing corn to feed and some ethanol usage and some exports, but mainly those other two, there's as much motivation to plant corn as the market can give right now. And all across the state, there's no place that ratio is over 1.9. Well, 1.98 is the highest. That's in Topeka. So the market seems to be giving every incentive to plant corn while there's still a chance to do it. And we'll see where that goes.
And let's finish up talking about the soybean numbers out of the WASDE report. Very little new there to nudge prices all that much. One of the things that does stand out in the latest data, though, and in recent reports from the USDA, we're still seeing good soybean export action, Dan.
Yes. The weekly exports as of May the 5th, still waiting for all of South America to get cleared out, 17.3 million bushels. But the bigger issue is we basically have total shipments and what's bought ahead of about 2.148 billion bushels, and that's greater than the USDA's projection. So they're clearly counting on some people getting to the end of this market year, shifting out of this, rolling over to the next market year. And by the way, we have 413 million bushels already out there in that next market year. We're about 19% of the way to the USDA's projection of about 2.2 billion, and we still have basically about 17 weeks left this market year. I think overall, maybe the biggest issue is to see what they did to prices. Current marketing year's prices projected at $13.25, projection for next year at $14.40. And again, when you look at soybeans, the November soybean number is $14.80, the cash price $14.40. So you can kind of look and see what they think about basis. Soybean basis around the U.S. has been pretty wide, 80 cents to $1 under. Well, here they've got November futures $14.80. We're projecting a cash price at $14.40. So they're basically looking at a pretty tight year. I think one thing that I'm going to really be watching is what the USDA did in their projection of South American crop size. You had the trade coming in tangibly, strongly below what the USDA said those crops were going to be out of there. So in a way, that's kind of a hidden caution in what seemed to be pretty optimistic world numbers, because the USDA is not. I need to double check that. We'll talk about that next week. It seems that they're out of step with what the trade and even what they're saying in country, perhaps, for the size of those crops. And if they come in tight, then that just lends all that much more support to these markets going forward.
Well, again, Dan has put together some thoughts on that USDA World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates report and the grain market's response now and likely ahead to those numbers on the agmanager.info website. Check that out, agmanager.info. Dan, as always, great work, and thanks for joining us once more. Enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Dan O'Brien, along with us each Friday to talk grain markets. He is a grain market economist with K-State Research and Extension. We'll return with more for you after this break. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Welcome back to Agriculture Today, and the conclusion right here of a series this week taking a look at non-traditional agricultural financing, which was the theme of a large effort by a group of agricultural economists from numerous land-grant universities around the country, and it's now available for review. Shed some great light on where what we're calling non-traditional financing fits into the overall ag credit climate. Jenny Ifft is back with us, risk management specialist with K-State Research and Extension, among those spearheading this work. And two of the contributors to it are joining us now from their respective universities. Bruce Ahrendsen is an agricultural economist at the University of Arkansas, and Will Secor is an agricultural economist likewise at the University of Georgia. Jenny, before we bring them in, again to set the framework of this effort to pull together loads of information on non-traditional financing and the purpose behind this project, if you'd remind us.
Yeah. So first of all, as a reminder, when we talk about non-traditional financing, is we're talking about the diverse sources of financing that are available to producers outside of traditional channels like farm credit lenders and commercial banks. One of the big questions with non-traditional finance is the risk associated with these financing channels. And it's not necessarily that we think these lenders are more risky. It's a data issue. We don't know if they're more risky or not. So the purpose of the special issue was to tackle this from a research perspective. And both of the studies we're going to be talking do a great job of getting creative with data and conducting analyses with it.
And they are focused on specific lending scenarios, which we'll get into right here, if we might. Bruce Ahrendsen is with us now, and he is, again, from the University of Arkansas. What you did here, Bruce, for your part in this was take a look at non-traditional credit as it would relate to borrower risk associated with USDA farm loans. Tell about why you wanted to pick up on this particular angle.
Well, there's in general a lack of information on these type of lending activities, as Jenny was saying. And so what we wanted to do is have a deep dive into some of the USDA Farm Service Agency data and look at their balance sheet data to see what other kind of lending activities these borrowers are having. So we were looking at Farm Service Agency 7-year intermediate term loans that would be used for breeding livestock, machinery and equipment and such, as well as some short term, like 1 year, which would be like fertilizer input. So you could get from your different input suppliers. So those were the types of loans we were looking at that were to borrowers that had loans originated by FSA during 2011 through 2020, actually. Mm-hmm. And what we wanted to do is look at what kind of default probability there is on those FSA loans and try to see if there's any association with these other lenders.
So these comparisons were made in this data crunch, and you went through a few numbers here to get to some conclusions. The whole thought here has been, is there more risk involved in non-traditional financing? And did you distinguish those default levels? Did you find that there are differences here?
Right. And we have to be careful not to say that these non-traditional lenders are causing an FSA loan to go in default, because it could be the other way around, that they're getting the loan because they're in a different situation. And FSA loans are not typical. It's a small share of the overall market, so I wouldn't want to draw out conclusions too broadly. But what we did see is that, like 23% of these borrowers had some other type of intermediate term loan through, it was like 16% of them had it through John Deere, AGCO, or Case New Holland. And then we had like 5% of them had loans from your input suppliers that were like 1 year or shorter term loans. So yeah, I guess we were surprised how many of these there were actually with these particular borrowers. So we did see a significant relationship with the default likelihood of this 7-year loan going 90 plus days delinquent. So that's how we measure default. And we saw that particularly those that had a intermediate term loan from these non-traditional or vendor, or sometimes we might call point of sale financing arrangement, that they were more likely, had a higher likelihood of defaulting, particularly on those loans that are intermediate term balances that were over 50,000. So the larger ones were more delinquent. And then the more numbers of these loans that you had would tend to have also association of more likely to default over the time frame, as well as those short-term loans were also strongly significant. Again, it's an association, not really saying that those loans caused the FSA loan to go delinquent.
The relevance of your findings, they have a bit of a different twist to them, because you are talking about government-backed loans, USDA loan arrangements through the Farm Service Agency. So what you've discovered here, do you think it has policy implications in that respect, Bruce?
We do. I think there's some concern. Again, we would have to go out to see if other lenders had this same type of experience, but it could have an impact that if there was a widespread effect of this, could be kind of a system-wide. It could cause a broader default situation in the farm sector. Right now, it doesn't look like it would likely be that, at least for our results, but that's a concern. And lenders in general, I used to make loans, farm loans, and you would see that when you had a lot of lenders involved, it's hard to prioritize, right, where you're going to be paying off those loans, who you're going to be paying.
It's really a good contribution to this overall body of work from that angle on USDA Farm Service Agency loans and how non-traditional financing might relate to those loan situations. Want to bring your colleague in, once again, Will Secor, University of Georgia, who contributed still another look at this, and this relates to Chapter 12 bankruptcy situations. And Will, what you were exploring in your research here, how those non-traditional lenders queue up as far as receiving payments from bankruptcy situations. Is that correct?
That's right. So the motivation for our study was when we were looking at 2007 to 2018, we saw, particularly for where we are in Georgia, a significant number of Chapter 12 or farm bankruptcies. So what we wanted to figure out is how are non-traditional lenders treated in this Chapter 12 bankruptcy process. So we were able to use some unique case level data on Chapter 12 cases, actually, for the state of Georgia, and tie the actual lender to the case and figure out, okay, this particular claim was from a traditional lender. This one was non-traditional lender. So you're able to go through all the different claims within each of those Chapter 12 cases and identify whether those claims were from traditional lenders or non-traditional lenders.
Cutting right to it then, what did you find when you compared traditional versus non-traditional and the likely payouts from a Chapter 12 bankruptcy circumstance?
Yeah, so what we found was interesting. So the average number of non-traditional creditors is almost double the number of traditional creditors for the cases we looked at. Also, while there were more non-traditional creditors, the average debt for those non-traditional creditors is only about 17% of the average debt of those traditional creditors. So as far as how they're treated in the process, we found that non-traditional lenders receive 10% less of their claim compared to traditional lenders with secured debt. So the claim type is really important. And so that's where we see most of that difference. When you control for that claim type, there isn't a significant difference between traditional and non-traditional lenders. So I think the big takeaway is for the ag lender. So understanding what is the security, whether it's secured or not, and those non-traditional lenders might be more concerned for that unsecured type of lending in the bankruptcy process.
Well, there are two more of the pieces of information that collectively come together to bring forth this report we're referring to. And Jenny, as a concluding thought on this, this information does cast a much broader and clearer light on non-traditional financing. How do you hope folks within and outside of agriculture will take to this and utilize this information?
Right. We've definitely learned a lot from all the studies conducted as a part of this special issue. I think jointly what they confirm is that non-traditional finance is indeed growing. There's a lot of financing options out there for production agriculture, and there's a lot of competition for lenders. So for the farm managers, this is an opportunity. It's also a challenge. It's a complex decision in terms of financing. And from a policy perspective, it's really important to have a better understanding of how much risk there is in the farm sector across all types of lenders, including non-traditional lenders.
There's a great lot of detail to all of this. You have now posted this in total on agmanager.info for review.
We have a summary on Ag Manager and a link to all the articles as well as a guest editorial.
Check that out. It's right there on the front page, agmanager.info. Jenny, thanks to you once again for contributing to this. And want to thank you, Will and Bruce, for your contributions as well. We appreciate your time.
And yours as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Along with K-State's Jenny Ifft, Will Secor, and Bruce Ahrendsen, both agricultural economists. Will is from the University of Georgia, and Bruce is from the University of Arkansas. We'll be back with more. This is Agriculture Today. Finishing out this Agriculture Today, Kansas agricultural weather and the latest from the Weather Data Library here at K-State. Meteorologist, K-State Research and Extension, Chip Redmond, on the line with us. Those 3 days of spring, Chip, were certainly enjoyable before we went headlong into summertime. It has been warm to flat-out hot the last several days.
Yeah, we had a big switch there, especially considering the first 4 months of the year were below normal temperature-wise. Our warm temperatures are a result of basically a bottled-up jet stream. We've had really active flow with those frequent cold fronts the last few months. We had one strong front go through and developed a cutoff low, we call it, basically a system that's cut off from the jet stream in southeast U.S., and that created a big bottleneck in the pattern. And as a result, that kept us in a persistent south to southwest flow across the plains for multiple days. That was able to bring in much warmer air from the southwest and persisted for an extended period of time.
The growing degree day accumulations must have surely picked up appreciably here in the last several days, have they not, Chip?
They have, and much to some people's demise, because now that we're seeing increased heat, we're seeing increased wheat development at a faster rate than what we would expect. So we went from slow green up, basically, to accelerated green up, and that creates stunted growth and wheat maturing faster than it normally would at a particular height. And then we're also seeing it with the vegetation. In basically a 2 weeks time frame, we went from green up for just eastern Kansas to green up for the whole state. We still have some brown areas where precipitation didn't occur, but the vegetation is actively growing statewide now and basically full-on summer mode.
And by the way, we'll be hearing about the condition of the winter wheat crop with reports from the Hard Winter Wheat Tour taking place next week around Kansas. Well, Chip, as far as the outlook and some moisture overnight around Kansas, reports are still coming in as to the magnitude of that. But as we look into the weekend and beyond, will we see enhanced chances of moisture in the coming days?
Unfortunately, that answer is not likely. We expect several, basically daily rounds of thunderstorms, very isolated in nature with the heaviest rains. It's going to rain hard when it does rain. It's not going to be a light pitter-patter. It's going to be mainly focused in central and to eastern Kansas through really the next 7 days. While we do have some forecast models putting out as much as like a half inch to 3/4 of an inch of moisture, it's going to be really localized. I wouldn't be surprised to see more in certain places, but definitely less in a more widespread area. We're in basically a June to even July weather pattern, and as a result, we're seeing the thunderstorm activity that we would normally see in the summer. Well, we're seeing that now, too.
And will we see accompanying June and July-like temperatures in the days ahead?
We're going to be above normal temperature-wise, probably through most of the month, especially for the Southwest and areas that are still in persistent drought. We're going to have a brief reprieve this weekend with temperatures in the 80s. That's still above normal. Our average highs are in the mid-70s this time of year. And as you get into next week, it looks like we might see some warmer temperatures return. But I will say there is a little bit of optimism right now in late May. The Madden-Julian oscillation is a pattern that we look at for moisture in the summertime, and it's hinting at that it will be in a position probably starting around the 20th or so to potentially bring some more moisture. So there's a little hope that we can hold on to, and if we get some moisture in here, we'll also have slightly cooler temperatures, give everyone a break from these above normal temperatures. So there is some hope on the horizon, and this combination of above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation has just been hurting us. So hopefully we can buck that trend a little bit.
Well, let's hang our hat on that. We appreciate the word, Chip, as always. Thanks, and have a good weekend.
Yep, you as well.
Meteorologist Chip Redmond, K-State Research and Extension. That brings our Friday edition to a close. Thanks for tuning in, and enjoy your weekend. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.